human consciousness moves on after death, and these are some findings from near-death experiences as well. One of the biggest questions modern-day science seeks to answer about human consciousness has to do with its origin. Of course, it has to do with our souls. Of course, they come from God. Now, whether it's simply a product of the brain or if the brain itself is a receiver of consciousness, if consciousness is not a product of the brain, it would mean that our physical bodies are not necessary for its continuation, that awareness can exist outside our bodies. Asking these questions is fundamental to understanding the true nature of our reality, and with quantum physics gaining more popularity, questions regarding consciousness and its relationship to human physicality become increasingly relevant. Now, the danger here about scientists talking about consciousness not taking into account the soul, the spirit of the person, in my humble opinion, is very wrong. The soul and the body are a psychosomatic union. Now, going back to this, Max Planck, the theoretical physicist credited with originating quantum theory, a feat that won him the Physics Nobel Prize in 1918, offers perhaps the best explanation of why understanding consciousness is so essential. Quote, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness," end quote. Eugene Wigner, also theoretical physicist and mathematician, stated that it's not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. Does consciousness move on after death? In 2010, one of the most respected scientists in the world, Robert Lanza, published a book titled Biocentrism: How Life and Consciousness Are Keys to the Understanding the True Nature of the Universe. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. An expert in regenerative medicine and the scientific director of Advanced Cell Technology Company, Lanza is also very interested in quantum mechanics and astrophysics, an interest that led him on a path to developing his theory of biocentrism, the theory that life and consciousness are fundamental to understanding the nature of our reality, and that consciousness comes prior to the creation of the material universe. In other words, spirit is before matter. His theory implies that our consciousness does not die with us, but rather moves on. And this suggests that consciousness is not a product of the brain, it's something else entirely, and modern science is only beginning to understand what that might be. He's talking about the soul here. Of course, the soul doesn't die. It's created at the time of our conception, and it doesn't die as a part of God. Now, going back to this theory is best illustrated by the quantum double-slit experiment. Please look at the video before this one, and you'll see what we're talking about there, having to do with nature acting in various ways depending on us observing it. Isn't that bizarre? That's the link between quantum physics and the human consciousness. You'll find that's the video before this one. So it's the great example that documents how factors associated with consciousness and our physical material world are connected in some way, that the observer creates the reality. Physicists are being forced to admit that the universe could be a mental construction, or at the very least that consciousness plays a fundamental role in the creation of matter. Now, I have to put my comment in here before I lose my train of thought, before I forget this. In Heart Math, the scientists there have found that our prayers and our thoughts actually create our universe, our reality. So we are our thoughts. We are our prayer. And our thoughts can even stop solar storms. Our thoughts can even correct the problems in the universe. Isn't that something? Now, going back to this, R.C. Henry, professor of physics and astronomy at Johns Hopkins University, wrote in 2005 publication for the journal Nature, he said, according to pioneering physicist Sir James Jeans, the stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. The universe is immaterial, mental and spiritual, live and live and enjoy, he says. Lanza's theory implies that if the body generates consciousness, then consciousness dies when the body dies. But if the body receives consciousness in the same way that a cable box receives satellite signals, then of course consciousness does not end at the death of the physical vehicle. This is an example that's commonly used to describe the enigma of consciousness. The double-slit experiment has shown repeatedly that observations not only disturb what has to be measured, they produce it. We compel the electron to assume a definite position. We ourselves produce the results of measurement, end quote. The idea that we could be living in a holographic type of universe is not far-fetched. And if the observer is required for physical matter to manifest, then the observer must exist before the physical body. The hypothesis that the brain creates consciousness dominates the mainstream materialistic world of science, despite the wealth of evidence showing that the brain and our entire physical reality, for that matter, could be a product of consciousness. So below is a great quote to illustrate what is meant by material science. The modern scientific worldview is predominantly predicated on assumptions that are closely associated with classical physics. Materialism, the idea that matter is the only reality, is one of these assumptions. A related assumption is reductionism, the notion that complex things can be understood by reducing them to the interactions of their parts, or to simpler or more fundamental things such as the tiny material particles. This was from Manifesto for Post-Materialistic Science. Examining the neurochemical processes in the brain that occur when one is having a subjective experience is important and does offer certain insights. It tells us that when this type of experience is happening, that is going on in the brain. But it does not prove that the neurochemical processes are producing the experiment. What if the experiment itself is producing the neurochemical processes? Determining how consciousness causes matter to materialize is our next step. One thing is for certain, however, that all of the information out there postulating the existence of consciousness as independent from the brain, it's time to push the boundaries of our current accepted framework of knowledge and question what we think we know. The implications of this theory are immense. Just imagine if life after death were confirmed by mainstream scientific community. How much would this impact not only our understanding of science, but also philosophy, religion, and many other areas of our lives? A great lecture, video by Dr. Gary Schwartz, Professor, University of Arizona, and you'll find these videos here on the link of this article. He was discussing whether consciousness is a product of the brain or a receiver of it. It's a little overview of a subject that is full of peer-reviewed scientific research that not many people have time to go through. It would actually be almost impossible to go through all of it. Some materialistically inclined scientists and philosophers refuse to acknowledge these phenomena because they are not consistent with their exclusive conception of the world. Rejection of post-materialist investigation of nature or refusal to publish strong science findings supporting a post-materialist framework are antithetical to the true spirit of scientific inquiry, which is that empirical data must always be adequately dealt with. Data which do not fit favored theories and beliefs cannot be dismissed a priori. Such dismissal is the realm of ideology and not science. Dr. Gary Schwartz, Professor of Physics, Medicine, Neurology, Psychiatry, and Surgery at University of Arizona said, now what about near-death experiences? There's a video here, Dr. Bruce Grayson, and you'll find it again in the article link below, speaking at a conference that was held by the United Nations. He's considered to be one of the fathers of near-death studies and is a professor emeritus of psychiatry and neurobehavioral science at the University of Virginia. And in the video, he describes documented cases of individuals who were clinically dead, showing no brain activity, but observed everything that was happening to them on the medical table below at the same time. In other words, their spirit was apart from their body. Now, he describes how there have been many instances of this, where individuals are able to describe things that should have been impossible to describe. Another significant statement by Dr. Grayson posits that this type of study has been discouraged due to our tendency to view science as completely materialistic. Seeing is believing, so to speak, in the scientific community. It's unfortunate that just because we can't explain something through materialistic means, it must be instantly discredited. The simple fact that consciousness itself is a non-physical thing is troubling for some scientists to comprehend, and as a result of it being non-material, they believe it cannot be studied by science. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, have been documented and studied for a long time. For example, in 2001, International Medical Journal The Lancet published a 13-year study on near-death experiences, NDEs. They said our results show that medical factors cannot account for the occurrence of NDEs. All patients had a cardiac arrest and were clinically dead, with unconscious result from insufficient blood supply to the brain. In those circumstances, the EEG, a measure of brain electrical activity, becomes flat. And if CPR is not started with 5 to 10 minutes, irreparable damage is done to the brain and the patient will die. Researchers monitored a total of 344 patients, and an astounding 18% of them had some sort of memory from when they were dead or unconscious, no brain activity, and 12%, that is 1 out of every 8, had a very strong and deep experience. Keep in mind that these experiences have occurred when there is no electrical activity in the brain following cardiac arrest. Another study comes out of the University of Southampton, where scientists found evidence that awareness can continue for at least several minutes after death. In the scientific world, this was thought to be impossible. It's the world's largest near-death experience study ever published, and it was published in the journal Resuscitation. In 2008, a large-scale study involving 2,060 patients from 15 hospitals in UK, US, and Australia was launched. The Awareness During Resuscitation, AWARE for short, study, sponsored by University of Southampton, the UK, examined the broad range of mental experiences in relation to death. Researchers also tested the validity of conscious experiences using objective markers for the first time in a large study to determine whether claims of awareness compatible with out-of-body experiences correspond with real or hallucinatory events. And concluding comments on the video, Nikola Tesla said it best: the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. There's a reason why every year internationally recognized scientists continue to push this commonly overlooked topic into the mainstream scientific community. The fact is, matter, that is protons, electrons, photons, anything that has mass, is not the only reality. If we wish to understand the nature of our reality, we cannot keep examining physical reality while ignoring the fact that the unseen makes up most of it. Perhaps the most imperative question is, what is the role of non-physical systems such as consciousness in relation to physical systems, that is matter? Despite the unrivaled empirical success of quantum theory, the very suggestion that it may be literally true as a description of nature is still greeted with cynicism, incomprehension, and even anger. This is from T. Folger, Quantum Shamtum, 2001. This is what's known as post-materialist science, in my opinion. It's clearly the next area of study to further understand the nature of our universe, and the study of consciousness is right at its heart. I'll leave you with one last discussion between Dr. Grayson, mentioned earlier in the article, and the chief scientist in the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Dr. Dean Radin. And this is from Collective Evolution, Arjun Walia, Unbended Reality. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.